London, 1888. The foggy streets of Whitechapel are gripped with terror. A mysterious figure known only as Jack the Ripper is on the loose, committing a series of brutal murders that would go down in history as one of the most notorious unsolved cases. But who was Jack the Ripper? Over the years, countless suspects have been proposed, each with their own shadowy secrets. Today, we dive deep into the investigation, the theories and the suspects that have intrigued and haunted investigators for over a century. To truly understand the complexity and intrigue surrounding Jack the Ripper, we must first explore the grim details of the Whitechapel murders and the intense investigation that followed. The Whitechapel district of London was a labyrinth of narrow alleys and dimly lit streets, a perfect setting for the horrors that would unfold in the autumn of 1888. Between August and November of that year, 5 women were brutally murdered in a series of crimes that shocked the city and became known as the Whitechapel murders. These women, now known as the Canonical Five, were Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly. Mary Ann Nichols was the first known victim, found on the morning of August 31st, 1888. Her body was discovered on Bucks Row with her throat deeply slashed and her abdomen mutilated. Just over a week later, on September 8th, Annie Chapman was found in a backyard on Hanbury Street, her body similarly mutilated with internal organs removed. The brutality of these murders sent shockwaves through London, but the worst was yet to come. On September 30th, the Ripper struck twice in one night, killing Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes. Stride's body was discovered on Berner Street, but she had not been mutilated in the same way as the previous victims, leading some to believe that the Ripper had been interrupted. Less than an hour later, Eddowes was found in Mitre Square with her face and abdomen horrifically disfigured. The killer had taken parts of her internal organs, further fueling speculation about his medical knowledge. The final and most gruesome of the Canonical Five murders occurred on November 9th, when Mary Jane Kelly was found in her room on Miller's Court. Kelly's body was mutilated beyond recognition, with her organs and body parts scattered around the room. This murder marked the end of the Ripper's killing spree, but it left the public in a state of terror and confusion. The investigation into the Whitechapel murders was one of the largest and most intense manhunts in British history. Scotland Yard assigned their top detectives to the case, including Inspector Frederick Aberline. Aberline and his team were faced with an overwhelming challenge. There was no clear motive, no witnesses who could identify the killer, and a crime scene that offered few clues. The police received hundreds of letters from the public, many claiming to be from the killer himself. The most famous of these is the Dear Boss letter, in which the writer first uses the name Jack the Ripper. While it's debated whether these letters were genuine or simply the work of hoaxers, they added to the growing hysteria surrounding the case. Despite extensive efforts, including house-to-house searches, questioning of suspects, and the involvement of vigilant citizens, the police were unable to capture the Ripper. They had many theories about his identity, ranging from a deranged local to a foreigner passing through the area. But the lack of forensic technology and the chaotic nature of Whitechapel made it nearly impossible to track down the killer. The failure to apprehend Jack the Ripper led to widespread criticism of the police, with many accusing them of incompetence. Yet the investigation also highlighted the limitations of 19th century policing. The case remains open to this day, with modern technology offering new avenues for investigation, but the mystery of Jack the Ripper endures. During the height of the investigation, several individuals came under suspicion, but the police's opinions were divided, and the evidence was often circumstantial. Let's start by examining some of the suspects considered by the contemporaneous police. Montague John Druitt, a barrister and schoolteacher, is one of the earliest suspects identified by the police. His connection to the murders is largely based on the timing of his death. Druitt was found drowned in the Thames in December 1888, shortly after the last of the Canonical Five murders. Sir Melville Macnaghten, an assistant chief constable of the Metropolitan Police, noted that Druitt's family had expressed concerns about his mental state and that his suicide coincided with the end of the murders. However, there is little concrete evidence linking Druitt to the crimes. He was from a respectable middle-class background, and there are no known records of him having violent tendencies or any direct connection to Whitechapel. Another suspect, Thomas Cutbush, was identified by several officers, including Chief Inspector Donald Swanson and Sir Henry Smith, Commissioner of the City of London Police. Cutbush was institutionalized for violent and erratic behavior in 1891, a few years after the murders. He was known to have a deep hatred for women and was thought to have attacked them with a knife. Some believed that Cutbush's confinement brought an end to the murders, but there's no solid evidence directly connecting him to the Ripper crimes. Additionally, his attacks were significantly different from the mutilations seen in the Ripper cases. Aaron Kosminski, a Polish Jewish immigrant, is perhaps one of the most controversial suspects. He lived in Whitechapel and was known to have suffered from severe mental health issues, eventually being committed to an asylum. Sir Robert Anderson, Assistant Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, and Chief Inspector Donald Swanson both believed Kosminski was the Ripper. Swanson's notes suggest that a witness identified Kosminski as the killer, but refused to testify due to fear of implicating a fellow Jew. However, no physical evidence has ever been produced to connect Kosminski to the crimes, and his behavior in the asylum was described as largely non-violent. The theory remains hotly debated among historians and criminologists. The press and public had their own theories, often fueled by sensationalism and xenophobia. Some of the suspects emerged from the media frenzy rather than solid police work. Francis Tumblety was an eccentric American quack doctor who found himself under suspicion after being arrested in London on unrelated charges around the time of the Ripper murders. Tumblety was known for his misogynistic views, particularly against prostitutes, and allegedly possessed a collection of female body parts preserved in jars. After his arrest, Tumblety fled to the United States, evading further questioning. Despite the suspicions, there's no concrete evidence placing him at the scenes of the crimes, and some historians argue that he was an opportunist rather than a murderer. John Peitzer, also known as Leather Apron, was a Polish Jew who worked as a bootmaker in Whitechapel. Early on, Peitzer was suspected due to local rumors and his reputation for harassing women. The nickname Leather Apron became synonymous with the Ripper in the early press coverage. However, Peitzer had strong alibis for the nights of the murders, and it became clear that he was not the Ripper. His wrongful identification highlights the xenophobia and quick judgments that permeated the investigation. James Maybrick, a Liverpool cotton merchant, became a suspect much later in the 1990s when a diary allegedly written by Maybrick was discovered. In this diary, Maybrick confesses to being Jack the Ripper. However, the authenticity of the diary has been the subject of intense debate, with many experts dismissing it as a modern hoax. Despite this, the diary has its supporters who argue that Maybrick's deteriorating mental state due to arsenic addiction could explain the violent outbursts described in the Ripper killings. As time passed, more suspects were proposed by various authors and researchers, often leading to new and sometimes outlandish theories. One of the more sensational theories suggests that Sir William Gull, the royal physician, was involved in the murders as part of a Masonic conspiracy to cover up an illegitimate royal birth. This theory gained popularity through the book Jack the Ripper, The Final Solution by Stephen Knight. According to the theory, Gull carried out the murders to silence those who knew about Prince Albert Victor's alleged secret marriage to a common woman. However, this theory is widely discredited by historians who argue that there is no evidence to support such a dramatic conspiracy. Walter Sickert, a famous British painter, was proposed as a suspect by crime novelist Patricia Cornwell. Cornwell suggested that Sickert's paintings contained hidden clues about his involvement in the Ripper murders. She even funded a forensic investigation to prove her theory, claiming that DNA evidence from letters attributed to the Ripper matched samples from Sickert's paintings. However, most experts believe that Sickert was simply fascinated by the case and that his connection to the murders is purely speculative. George Chapman, born as Surin Klusowski, was a Polish immigrant who became a notorious serial killer in the early 20th century. Chapman poisoned 3 of his wives and was hanged for his crimes in 1903. Inspector Frederick Aberline, one of the original Ripper investigators, believed Chapman could have been the Ripper, citing his violent tendencies and presence in Whitechapel during the murders. However, Chapman's method of poisoning differs significantly from the brutal mutilations carried out by the Ripper. While Chapman remains a plausible suspect, the evidence is not conclusive. Throughout the years, the list of suspects in the Jack the Ripper case has grown longer, with each new theory adding a layer of intrigue to the mystery. One of the most controversial theories is that Prince Albert Victor, the Duke of Clarence and heir to the British throne, was Jack the Ripper. This theory is largely based on the idea that the royal family covered up his involvement to avoid a scandal. However, there is no credible evidence linking Prince Albert Victor to the murders, and records suggest he was not even in London during most of the killings. Another theory proposes that Jack the Ripper was, in fact, a woman. Mary Piercy, who was convicted of the brutal murder of her lover's wife, was suggested as a possible suspect. Some theorists argue that a woman could have moved through Whitechapel unnoticed, and Piercy's violent crime showed she was capable of murder. However, this theory lacks solid evidence, and most experts believe the Ripper's killings were committed by a man. James Kelly, a mental asylum escapee who killed his wife in 1883, has also been proposed as a suspect. Kelly was on the run during the time of the Ripper murders, and some believe his psychosis could have driven him to kill again. His knowledge of anatomy, demonstrated in his wife's murder, aligns with the Ripper's methods. Kelly later voluntarily returned to Broadmoor Asylum in 1927, where he died. While he remains an intriguing suspect, there is no direct evidence linking him to the Whitechapel murders. Dr. Thomas Neil Cream, also known as the Lambeth poisoner, was a Scottish-born doctor who was convicted of multiple murders by poisoning. Cream was executed in 1892, but his name entered the list of Ripper suspects after rumours surfaced that his last words were, "I am Jack." However, this claim is highly disputed. Cream was imprisoned in Illinois during the time of the Ripper murders, which would have made it impossible for him to be the killer unless he had somehow escaped without being noticed, a scenario that is widely regarded as implausible. Frederick Bailey Deeming, a notorious conman and murderer, was convicted and hanged for the murder of his wife and children in Australia. Deeming had a violent history and lived in Whitechapel during the time of the Ripper murders. Some investigators believe that Deeming's brutal crimes, which included the slashing of throats, bore similarities to the Ripper's modus operandi. Despite these suspicions, there is no direct evidence linking Deeming to the Whitechapel murders, and his psychological profile suggests he was more interested in financial gain than in random acts of violence. Joseph Barnett, a fish porter in Billingsgate Market, was the live-in partner of Mary Jane Kelly, the last of the canonical 5 victims. Barnett lived with Kelly until a few days before her murder, and some have suggested that jealousy or anger over Kelly's return to prostitution may have driven him to kill her, and possibly the other victims as well. Barnett's knowledge of the area and his proximity to Kelly make him a plausible suspect. However, there is no solid evidence directly tying him to the murders, and he was never charged with any crime related to the Ripper case. Over a century later, the identity of Jack the Ripper continues to elude us. From aristocrats to asylum escapees, the list of suspects is long and varied, yet no single theory has ever been universally accepted. The enigma of Jack the Ripper remains one of the most enduring mysteries in criminal history, a puzzle that may never be solved. But the search for answers continues, with modern technology offering new possibilities in this age-old investigation. Could there be clues that were overlooked? Could advancements in DNA analysis finally unmask the Ripper? We invite you to dive deeper into this case, to explore the theories, and to form your own conclusions. If you're passionate about true crime and the mysteries that have shaped our world, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. Join us as we unravel the threads of history's darkest tales.